Today's Blindside is an extended version of my interview with Messages for Men event organiser Natty, discussing career feminist Laura Bates's claim that she attended her event in 2018. Excerpts from the interview have featured in the Glass Blind Spot episode examining that very claim, and also in the episode examining Bates's central thesis. I've included links to follow Natty on Twitter and to check out content from her Messages for Men YouTube channel. So if you haven't already, be sure to check those out after you watch British Badger Belle Natty helping me to fact check Laura Bates.
When I was reading it, for a minute I thought I was going to have my 10 seconds of fame in Laura Bates's book, because she mentions a video promoting the Messages for Men conference.
Oh yeah.
And as you remember, I kind of put one together for that. But seemingly, it kind of doesn't sound familiar to my recollection of the work that I did, because it's described as video caught my eye primarily because it featured images of me. It seemed to the organisers that the best way to advertise this conference about conveying positive messages for men was to use a video of images of high-profile feminists, most of them crudely photoshopped to include devilish eyes or horns. Is that ringing a bell at all as one of the organisers of the event?
Okay, let's see. So last year was your video,
yeah,
which had John Waters at the beginning.
Well, yeah, that was 2018, so that's the one that's the conference she's talking about. I did one last.
Is she saying that video she's referencing is for 2018?
Yeah, she is.
Okay, shall we? I can remind myself of the video from 2018. I'm fairly confident it did not have.
Oh,
yeah. An image of her with horns or
yeah.
other feminists with horns. However, just let's double check, because
Okay.
I could be wrong. Right. So let's see. So we go to go to my Messages for Men channel. So the first year, and then we go down up to second year. Right, here we go. Let's see if we can get this screen share. No, that's you.
So why are men afraid?
That's you, right?
Yeah, that's the one I made. There were a couple of other people did sort of, kind of voice to camera, kind of little short videos encouraging people to come. But there's certainly nothing on the Messages for Men channel that remotely sounds like what she's describing.
No, but I had a trailer the year before. That was not you.
Okay.
And it did not have. Why is it not on this channel?
Yeah, I did have a look at the channel, and they didn't appear to be. There certainly wasn't anything that was similar. Do you want to maybe have a think about that one, and we'll talk about the rest of it?
Honestly, I'm thinking, I'm not sure I should be taking anything she says seriously. Clearly, but honestly, I don't really know what she's on about. There's certainly been videos made like that.
Yeah. I wouldn't doubt it.
YouTube has got plenty of that, or at least used to.
Listen, don't worry about that. We'll kind of have a look over the weekend or whatever, kind of if anything jumps out. But I think kind of my main point would be it certainly wasn't a kind of advert for the 2018 conference.
No, and I don't remember using her face at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember anything of the sort with her face in it. I mean, like, I mean, to be honest, it's not particularly I wouldn't, if we had used her face and we had done that, I would have been like, okay, it's called mockery. Like, fine. But we didn't. It's like there are plenty of examples of feminist mockery, of people mocking feminists. And J4MB has engaged in that quite extensively in the past.
They have, yeah.
So it's not as if she couldn't say, okay, this is an example of mockery from it's from a different issue or a different incident, right? But it's like people like her can't help themselves but just lie, or exaggerate in these small ways, right?
Yeah, well, I mean that's the key to this book is it's extraordinary conflation, and it's the type of conflation that I think most people would be familiar with. Certainly, anybody that's advocated men's rights, where kind of quotes are plucked from context and placed. I mean, essentially, her thesis is that some individuals who have self-identified as incels and gone on to commit mass murder are representatives and champions of an extreme misogyny ideology that everybody in this basket of her book kind of embraces, or at the very least as a gateway drug. Kind of men's rights activists who are seen as the mildly respectable protrusion seeping out of the sewers of the manosphere. That's
the sewers.
So I mean, but yeah, so I kind of assumed that claim was bogus. And there are a lot of bogus claims. And one of the things I was very surprised about is the book's actually, in my opinion, quite poorly researched, because she is essentially kind of regurgitating a lot of claims that have been made in kind of various other journals, or kind of newspapers and blogs and such. But her claim that she attended the Messages for Men conference strikes me as relatively plausible. Or at the very least that she sent, perhaps a minion to attend on her behalf. It does seem. I've talked to Liz. I've talked to a couple of people about it. I've talked to Elizabeth, and it does seem quite odd because she is quite a famous person, kind of, particularly in the sphere of anybody that's interested in gender identity politics. And I think it's fair to say she's not an attractive woman as well. So in a meeting with predominantly men, it just strikes me as kind of surprising that nobody kind of has a recollection of her being there.
So what I have done, because you told me that she claims she came to Messages for Men in 2018.
Yeah.
I've just put a little call out on Twitter and on the Women's Liberation Network Facebook page. Unfortunately, I've been naughty and I'm banned from posting on the Men's Walk to Celebrate International Men's Day official page that hosts Messages for Men. Okay. So I'll have to wait. Or I can get Elizabeth to do it because she's out there. Anyway, I also clearly have access to all the ticket holders of the past.
Yes.
Right? And so I am going to ask everyone if anyone remembers talking to well, let's assume she was blonde, because she is blonde, a blonde lady who looks like Laura Bates. I can't recollect seeing someone that vaguely looked like her at all in 2018. I mean, there is an image of a lady with short blonde hair and glasses, okay, who attended, and she was writing notes and stuff. Now, I could screen share you now because this could be her. And I do remember Rob talking to her quite extensively. So, and I said hello to her at one point. I didn't have an in-depth conversation with her, but he spoke to her for a bit. You can see the side of her face. And I remember because I spoke to her, and I don't remember thinking that she looked familiar to me. But, you know, I mean, has she ever had short hair? I don't think so. Maybe. Who knows?
That does not look like her.
No.
The two interesting things, okay, because I think that she describes talking to somebody, and it sounds like Jordan Holbrook based on the description. So I'm trying to contact Jordan to see if he's got any recollection.
Oh, he'll remember, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I mean that's I mean I suppose
I read what you sent me. Okay, yeah. It does seem in like enough, you know, situational detail for it to be true. It's just really weird that I don't know. I remember every woman that has attended, I've sort of either remembered or spoke to, because she clearly states that there was a handful of women at the event. She's correct on that, right? Every event there's been a handful of women. So I have either made it my priority to speak to them, or I've sort of noticed who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really don't remember a blonde looking lady who looked like Laura at all. And I mean, there was a production company one year. One of them was blonde, but I don't think that was her. If it was her, she was clearly lying about her identity.
Well, I mean, to clarify, she does say that, you know, she went undercover in the sense that she booked under the pseudonym of Alex something, because that was the kind of online pseudonym that she used whenever she was infiltrating various, you know, kind of discussion forums and groups and such. But kind of, I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of to a fair degree. I mean, it's quite a funny story that Laura Bates may have attended a Messages from Men conference. I'm less kind of bothered about whether it was her or a proxy or, you know, kind of a minion. I think it would be useful to kind of establish it kind of one way or the other, because I think it says something about her if she's claiming that she was there and she really wasn't. It occurred to me that I guess it's possible that she could have just watched the videos on your channel.
Yeah, which is perfectly fine. But why not just say, I watch videos?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, you know, it's not a big deal. Like, you can research by watching some videos. I don't get why you have to, you know, and also the way she builds up. So she's like, you know, it had a low ceiling. Well, actually, no, the venue didn't have a low ceiling. That room that the event was in, it's actually quite a high ceiling.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what she's getting at with that. I think she was trying to create an atmosphere, and she said something like that it was sticky and grey, like she's, you know, setting it up like it's some kind of horror film scene. It's just really cringe. Cringe is the word. I mean, you know, if you're talking about this group of radical people who are so full of hate for the opposite sex, or their own sex in my case, who just want to go out and mass shoot everyone, why do you need to build the scene to make it sound far scarier than it actually is? You know, that doesn't.
Well, I mean, that
doesn't make sense to me.
It would make sense to me on two levels. I mean, kind of one, of course, it sounds kind of much more sinister and nefarious than it was, which was a publicly advertised event where you could book tickets on Eventbrite and kind of watching on YouTube. But also it's clearly meant to be demeaning. One of the things I kind of meant, to talk to Elizabeth about, the co-organizer, was that only a few months previous to that, of course, there was the International Conference of Men's Issues in London, which was a 3-day event at a kind of major conference facility, and that was coordinated by J4MB. And one of the things that Elizabeth had done had kind of reached out to the media, including The Guardian, and were offering free tickets. So kind of, it was curious if during that time Laura Bates was researching a book about the manosphere, that there would be a perfect opportunity to go to a proper conference. So and just the way she describes it, I mean, I kind of felt a little bit bad for you guys, because she is quite rude about.
Well, shall I quote what I was just talking about? Right, she says,
"Yeah,
I approached several confused staff members, most of whom seemed to have no idea any event was taking place. I mean, they might not have understood what the event was because it's a private event, but fine. Before one disappeared to try and find out where the conference was being held, eventually he reappeared and directed me up 2 slightly sticky flights of stairs to a rather grim, low-ceiling room with dark grey painted walls in which some chairs had been set out facing a makeshift stage. So, I mean, as I said, I wouldn't describe that room as grim, personally, and I wouldn't describe it as low-ceilinged, because it's not low-ceilinged at all. And dark grey painted walls. I mean, if I can look at the room has got some grey in it, but I wouldn't say that it was dark because there's lots of lighting in the room. The room is a venue that's designed for small live music events, right? And it's not a dive bar. It's a little bit more upmarket than that, but only just, right? So, I'm just saying that it doesn't need to engage in this type of. This is what makes me suspicious about her claim, this kind of language that she's using. But anyway, and then she says there's a makeshift stage. The stage is not a makeshift stage. The stage is always there because it's a room for live music.
Yeah.
Anyway,
actually, Elizabeth took major offence at that, because apparently the Beatles have played on that stage. So.
Okay, and then she talks about the silver baubles on the Christmas tree, and I think there probably was a Christmas tree there because it's November. I mean, so that fine. It's just. Anyway, let's move on. I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite bizarre. I mean, two things that I was particularly kind of keen to take your view on. Was one, the flyer that was used to promote the event was quite a memorable, I think, painting alluding to Prometheus. So,
yes, it does allude to Prometheus. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was mentioned in the introduction, and she describes it as kind of vaguely homoerotic or something quite.
Yeah, and the inference is that is either she thinks that's a negative trait or some negative, or that the attendees of the conference would find something homoerotic negative, and therefore, look, she's noticed, and oh my gosh, these people don't even understand that they hate the gays, and therefore, and they're promoting something homoerotic.
Yeah.
And I would like to direct people who are possibly be listening to this to Alex Niora's talk last year. This guy is gay, very gay.
Okay.
And he did quite a controversial talk, actually. So, you know, he might get in trouble for that talk, but he doesn't care. So, you know, I think that I'm not sure what exactly she thinks she's getting at there. Is she trying to say that a bunch of men celebrating pure masculinity is therefore gay and bad, or that those men think that gays are bad and, you know, ha ha, maybe they're all secretly gay? Or I don't know, Brian, what do you think?
I guess. I think the kind of the one thing it reveals, I do think it was kind of an especially kind of catty observation, whatever she was getting at. It reveals a very kind of catty side of her. The you know, the whole description is very snooty. It kind of reminds me of Alan Partridge in a way, actually. To be completely honest,
We all know that Alan Partridge is a misogynist, right?
oh well, absolutely. But you could imagine kind of Alan Partridge's character writing about infiltrating a, you know, kind of feminist conference in much the same way. You know, kind of with a distinct kind of distraction from reality in terms of, you know, kind of how dangerous it was for, you know, kind of him to be sitting in a room of people discussing political identity politics. Yeah, so there was that. You know, there's the whole thing about I arrived and there was a very big queue, but oh no, it turned out to be for the bakery next door, and you know, then there was no queue at all for the event. It's very demeaning, and it's quite reflective of a trick she plays throughout the book, actually, which is, on the one hand, you know, she talks about trolls and the likes of sock puppet accounts, and that on the one hand these people are a very small number of people, that they're quite pathetic, they're, you know, kind of they've got no footholds in terms of developing, you know, kind of outside of their immediate sphere. But on the other hand, they're everywhere, and they're they're in danger of corrupting every youth from John O'Groats to Land's End. So you know, that struck me as kind of like, well, yeah, she could have gone to a major men's rights conference, but she wanted to talk about what was it was billed as a mini conference. It's, you know, kind of, it's very much recognised as a, you know, kind of slightly more informal and, you know, kind of celebratory event almost after the, you know, for International Men's Day, after the March for Men. So, and the other thing, I read the description to Elizabeth, and she was gobsmacked when I got to the description of the speeches. So I'll just remind you of what they were. So bear with me a minute. Okay, so here's her description of the speeches that she went to attend, presumably to listen to. The conference was small, and its attendees' arguments were weak. The end. That's it.
That's it. There's no, that she doesn't. You know what would be more impressive, or impressive? Sorry, not more. It wasn't impressive at all.
Sure.
Impressive would be, you know, if she actually did an analysis of maybe not all of the speeches, but at least the main speeches, right? And what their content was, and broke down. You know, I guess maybe it's just too much time to sit down and go through everything that's said, but at least summarize each one and then go, you know, detail why they were weak and what's wrong with them. But is that all she said? She doesn't go into any detail about them whatsoever.
Absolutely nothing. It's all kind of build up and suspense and the drama of kind of infiltrating this meeting, and with the exception of talking about this individual, a kind of very respectably dressed young man who seemed very nice until he got up and literally bayed for the bloods of Alison Saunders. But, you know, actually, no, sorry, that's not correct. She does speak a little bit about Elizabeth's introduction.
Yes, yeah.
So in fairness, she talks about that and sort of makes this direct link to Trump and how, kind of this is clear evidence that Trump is kind of very much part of the manosphere and influencing and, kind of all this sort of nonsense. But yeah, I mean, kind of, obviously I kind of wasn't there kind of physically, but I did, watch the speeches online. And, I do recall that there would have been kind of like enough controversial enough, kind of depending on your political perspective, I guess, things said that she could have cherry picked words out of context.
Mm.
I was kind of surprised because Elizabeth was mentioning that John Waters, for example, I think he did a second speech and he talked about abortion, and that tends to be a very
that's very controversial. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very triggering for feminists, certainly. So yeah, that's I found that slightly odd. Which it occurs to me that perhaps whoever was there didn't hang around very long.
Yeah, that's what I think. If she came, if
Yeah.
it was actually her, she was there for all of one speech, perhaps. Yeah. Which I think that is the most plausible explanation, because at the beginning of the event, I may have been not paying attention or running around or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I basically would like some clarification. I don't think Laura is going to respond to this at all, because she'll just be like, oh, I'm so important. I can't talk to these horrible radical terrorists. But she did mention do a whole how many pages about us in her book, so I think we have a right to respond to what she said. Yeah, I mean, I am genuinely curious to know what she actually did when she came, how long she came for. And as I said, I have asked the attendees just to confirm, just because, we have had researchers and we have had production company people come to the event, and they've all kind of made themselves known. And I have every year I thought, oh, someone's going to come and they're going to try and do some kind of expose or whatever. Very aware of this, the likelihood of this happening. It's not a surprise. It's just that most people have made themselves known to us, or we sort of know who they are or whatever, so it just, there's something missing.
Yeah, I think so. And it's at the end of the day, kind of, the review as such as it is what it is, and it in itself is very revealing, I think, over and above whether her claim to have actually personally attended the event.
I suspect she didn't watch any of the speeches.
Yeah.
Elizabeth seemed to know. I suspect she didn't at all. It just doesn't, because if she did and she got upset or triggered by any of them, she would probably mention it in the book, right?
Exactly. And the thing that I kind of find so significant about this claim is that I don't know if you've listened to her interview in Women's Hour. I'm not sure if I've sent that.
No, you sent it to me, and I was going to.
Yeah, well, I mean, but essentially, kind of, I suppose these things. So she talks about having infiltrated the manosphere, and then she gets very passionate and talks about, these people don't just exist online. I have been to their meetings. I've been to their events. I talked to a young man who, kind of as I described, a young, well-dressed man who seemed, this sort of man you'd sit beside on the bus. And the next minute he was begging for the blood of Alison Saunders, and without missing a beat, she is then. It's important to understand these are the sort of men that commit mass atrocities. I mean, it's just,
everyday men that she walks past.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's outrageous.
Ryan, you are capable of committing mass murder.
Certainly in the eyes of Laura Bates,
Yes.
absolutely, and that's the kind of the shocking thing. I'm kind of writing a review of the book, and I do touch on that sort of, well, technically speaking, I kind of talked at the same events the following year, so that's it. She is, very much talking about people like you and me, which and Jordan. So
the other thing that she says is that there were no women of color at the event, and I just want to point out that I'm not sure what percentage of non-whites you have to be a person of color these days. I don't know.
Sure.
I mean, they change these things all the time. But I am not. I am a woman of color.
That's right.
Event organised by a woman of color. I am a quarter Jamaican, quarter Irish, and half English. I don't know. I mean, is that color enough? Perhaps not. Depends who you're talking to, doesn't it?
It does, and again, certainly enough. Not enough for Laura Bates.
Also, I believe Catherine attended. She's not English.
Okay.
I would describe her as a woman of colour, but maybe she's not got enough colour that Laura's looking for. I don't know. So, I don't know. I need to remind some of the people that get obsessed with, not enough people of colour attending things or being in things, that this country is only got 13% non-British white population. Yeah. Okay. And within that, actually, that does include people that are still classed as white, but maybe from Eastern European or something. So 4% of the population are black and around 7 are Asian.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're going to have an event of 120 people, if you were going to try and work out what could be representative of that, I don't know, a couple of people who were black, a couple of people who were Asian would probably be a kind of representative. I don't know, you might be better at maths than me.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I suppose kind of like one equivalence is we both attended the Chicago International Conference of Men's Issues in 2019, and in a city with a greater ethnic kind of population mix, there was a kind of much more diverse kind of population of attendees and speakers kind of thing.
Well, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, that's it, and and I suppose the other, to turn that observation that she made on its head. I've never been to a Laura Bates event, and I've never been to the likes of a women's equality party kind of conference, for example.
I've been to a couple of their meetings, so I might have more evidence for you about this than you.
Okay, but
the meeting that I went to was there was probably about 20 women there.
Okay.
And I'd say about 4 or 5 of them were not white. Okay.
Were there, how many men were there?
Oh, just one.
Right. Yeah, and that would be, that's probably my main point is, kind of if, we've discussed this before, if you look at the diversity, particularly in the kind of what I describe as the leadership of the men's rights movement, kind of, there are plenty of women there. You don't see many men, kind of being elevated to the top of, kind of, or, kind of who's, you don't see many men prominent in the feminist movement at all, really. It's, kind of,
Really?
yeah.
No,
yeah.
I don't think they're allowed.
No,
They could be allies,
allies. Yeah.
not leaders generally, I would say. No, I mean, you know, honestly, if a woman, a black woman, an Asian woman, is up for getting more involved, we, you know,
Yeah. No,
they are.
absolutely.
I mean, clearly.
Yeah. No, I mean the other.
Mentions it like it's a deliberate decision or something.
Yeah.
But
Well,
there's again.
it was very similar. You will remember there was a smear by 50-50 Democracy about the International Conference of Men's Issues in London.
Oh yeah, I remember her. That well, there was a couple of journalists, but the one that I took the selfie with,
yeah,
she was the blast.
And again, you know, kind of there was great hay because the inference is that it's one step away from white supremacy. That's a kind of a key kind of inference that they're, you know, kind of getting at, and that's very much what, you know, kind of Laura Bates kind of goes on to talk about in the book. One thing I'm doing is I'm sort of preparing a kind of series of short videos fact checking her claims. Now,
Okay.
you know, some of them actually people like myself and other people have already, you know, kind of debunked certain claims that she repeats in the book. But one thing I'm hoping to do, and I suppose I'm doing now, is I'm hoping to talk to the people that she talks about in the book, because she very specifically doesn't talk to anyone remotely connected, and particularly, you know, kind of my main focus is really the chapter on the men's rights movement, so the men's rights activist, because it's the same story of kind of kind of creating this basket of deplorables with kind of loosely linked kind of online movements, incels, MGTOW, what are they called, pickup artists. But I think the main target of the book is very much men's rights activists. It's anyone speaking about or championing human rights for boys and men in a non-feminist manner, essentially, is her complaint. So, you know, kind of one fact I'll be kind of examining thoroughly is her very dismissive view of all of the young school children, or, you know, school boys or school children that have asked her about false rape allegations, and, you know, kind of what you know, how can one protect oneself from false rape allegations, and what about that, you know, kind of reality that these things do happen. And she claims that you have a 0.0003% chance of experiencing a false rape allegation.
Wow.
Yeah, which is extremely dismissive of, you know, kind of if a bunch of school children are, you know, kind of brought into a classroom to discuss sensitive topics about, you know, appropriate sexual behavior, etc., you know, kind of, it doesn't seem unreasonable that their questions are answered reasonably. Mm-hmm. I would have thought, and that's ultimately
manner, for sure.
Say that again.
Not in a dismissive manner, which is probably what she does.
Yeah.
Does she do any research into false rape accusations at all in the book?
I would say no, in the sense that I mean, her position is that no, look, that's long since been established that, you know, false rape.
Doesn't look into it. Yeah.
I
mean, for anyone interested, I would. We do have some data about this, which I'm sure you're going to be delving into, but it isn't as clear cut to demonstrate as other areas like domestic violence might be, for example.
Sure.
Just because of purely because the establishment doesn't really want straightforward data about false rape accusations out there, but there are ways that we can pin together what the rate could be, or is. I mean, this is covered in the Empathy Gap book.
Yeah.
So that book is a treasure trove of information and stats, official stats, about this, about these kinds of subjects. But accuse.me, the online forum, is like a support network, advice and advocacy for false accusations. And I would say if anyone wants some empirical and anecdotal evidence about the rate of false accusations going on in this country, that would be a good place to start.
Okay.
Just because if you go there, it's just endless posts of men, and mostly as well their wives and their mothers and their grandmothers. A lot of the time it's women in their lives who feel that they need to act on behalf of their men.
Yeah.
Talking about this. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And
fairly confident she didn't visit that website.
No, it seems highly unlikely. Kind of one thing I aim to do is she very much, and she's kind of voiced this in her interviews as well, and I would even have a degree of sympathy. I'm not sure that's quite the right word, but I would certainly believe that she quite possibly believes that she is in kind of great danger for writing this book. That she finishes it by saying, I realize, because obviously she's produced the Everyday Sexism Twitter feed. She does genuinely get what could be described as rape threats. I have seen her kind of retweeting some of them.
I'm sure she does get some genuine rape threats. I would never claim that she doesn't.
Yeah, but I suppose the thing would be kind of how likely is it in reality that a woman like Laura Bates would ever experience violence, compared to how likely is it would it be that kind of a schoolboy might experience a false rape allegation. And I suppose the point is kind of, even if we can't actually come to a definitive answer to that question, I suppose it might be reassuring for Laura Bates to know that men are much more likely to experience violence.
Yeah, and men are far more likely to experience violence. And that's not just from other men, because her response would be, that's from other men, and therefore, all men's fault.
Yeah.
But actually, no, when we look at the stats, it's just as likely to be from women. At least in domestic violence situations, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And whatever the answer to the question of how, what percentage chance does a young schoolboy have of experiencing a false rape allegation in his lifetime, it's certainly going to be higher than the 0.003%, which is based on the CPS reports establishing that essentially that's based on the number of women who have been convicted of false rape allegations.
Yeah.
And we do know that repeatedly in rape cases that collapse, the judge makes a decision that it wouldn't be in the public interest to progress prosecution because it may dissuade genuine victims of coming forward. And it's a very complex kind of issue. But the key is obviously Laura Bates just sees difficulties experienced by young schoolboys as, something, but it's not the same thing as difficulties experienced by people like her. And that's ultimately the...
I would love to see a study about the amount of accusations young schoolboys get, and I wonder if one exists. I'm not sure, maybe, but I would love to see that, because I suspect it would be far higher than than we know. And I mean, you know, there is a case to be said that once they're out into adulthood and out of education, then it would be less so.
Okay.
But you know, that still doesn't mean, it's a bit like when I mention that 70% of childhood neglect and abuse is conducted by the mothers. The response I get from feminists and their protectors is that that's because women spend the most amount of time with their children compared to fathers.
Yeah.
So I then could say, well, if the rate of false accusations against schoolboys by schoolgirls is quite high compared to how it is when they're adults, then, you know, I can say, well, yes, they are in proximity of the girls far more often because they're at school with them, right? Yeah. Perhaps, you know, I guess at what point do they start to say, well, you know, they're just around them more often, so that it's going to happen. And it's like, okay, I think there's definitely a logical inconsistency and hole in our argument that we could poke, you know.
As it very often is, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, so, I mean, what else does she say in the book that you think is of interest?
Well, I was
reading it extensively at some point too.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, as I say, kind of, you know, I have read the whole book. I was particularly kind of focusing, particularly in kind of writing a review on the chapter 4, which is called "Men Who Blame Women," and that's the men's rights activists.
Okay. Yes.
So she's kind of built a narrative starting with the men who hate women, the dreaded incels, who, you know, kind of she views as the absolute, you know, kind of scum of the barrel, so to speak. Then men who prey on women, the pickup artists, men who avoid women, MGTOW, and she attaches that to the Mike Pence rule, the vice president who had stated that he will only have lunch with his wife. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, yeah.
But that, you know, that was kind of examined in the context of Me Too and the possibility that in the kind of current environment, men are becoming more reluctant to be alone with women in working environments, for example.
Can I just say, isn't that what people like Laura want? You know, so their whole argument is that basically men are defective, okay, and that they can't control themselves, even though most of the feminist rhetoric is telling men to behave themselves better, right? Behave themselves in a way that feminists want, okay. But at the same time, they claim that men are defective inherently. So men are getting these two messages, you know, behave differently, but at the same time, you're defective. So a lot of men, if they just say, okay, well, you know what, I don't really know, I don't think I can win here. I don't really know where I stand. I can't, you know, my behavior, the goalposts are moved all the time. But then at the same time, maybe I agree that I'm defective. So you know what, I'm just going to step back and I'm not going to interact with you at all. And I think probably that's what you want, right? Because a lot of the complaints and the everyday sexism is all about this. It's about unwanted attention from men, right? So, you know, perhaps maybe someone like Mike Pence saying, you know what, I'm just not going to give women who are not my wife any attention at all.
Yeah.
Why is that a bad thing?
Well,
no, it's a bad thing.
Well, in the context of this book, it's a bad thing because you know, kind of professional women might miss out on important conversations and networking opportunities with Mike Pence. That's the narrative she's pushing. And I guess to answer the question, what does Laura Bates want? I honestly have no idea. I think she wants to kind of enrich herself and I guess ultimately kind of sell books.
Yeah.
That is, yeah. And she's used women in the same way, kind of with the Everyday Sexism Project.
Yeah.
But in terms of the activism and advocacy, feminism has always been a kind of complex and confusing message, because I think the example I'd quote would be Jeremy Corbyn. Whenever he first came to kind of power in the Labour Party, famously announced that he was going to consider women-only carriages, which was clearly a very direct kind of response or reaction to the Everyday Sexism Project, and and obviously
Again,
there was
damn that logical male brain, where even though Corbyn's probably not that logical in other ways, but that brain where he goes, you know what? Okay, let's just give you your own space, and men are not allowed there.
Yeah, because I think that's what you want, and I think it will get me votes. But obviously there was an immediate backlash, because no, you need to train men not to, And in the same way, there's a very patronising bit in the book where she talks about a mother who's very concerned about her young son, and kind of very concerned about what it's like kind of growing up in the current world, and has given him advice about consent and being very careful in any interactions with women. And Bates's observation on this is, gosh, if only she realised it could be so much simpler. Literally, all she has to do is teach her son not to rape women. It's that simple. So, but yeah, ultimately, it's extremely one-sided, and I think actually it reveals quite a lot about Laura Bates, because obviously she speaks from a feminist perspective, and to some extent that's fine. That's her political view, that she feels that sort of men, the pathway for towards nirvana for men is to embrace feminism. Not everybody agrees with her, certainly. I would say the majority don't agree with her. But it's very clear in this book she has very little regard or concern for men, and really wants to use them as a kind of bogeyman to silence all of her critics, including people like you.
Yeah. Silence other women with internalized misogyny.
Yes, indeed. And it is very interesting in the chapter in Men's Rights Activists. I was very surprised. I kind of figured she would probably play down the role of women, but she really skirts over them entirely. She literally mentions Karen Strong by name, and that's it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's not even going to be factually correct, of course. I mean, the whole book isn't most of the time. But, I mean...
Well, one question...
One of the characteristics about the MRM is the prevalence of women. You can't get away with not mentioning them at all, because there's quite a few figures who are influential. So that is extremely disingenuous, extremely so.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely revealing as well, because first of all, she's looking to isolate men in terms of kind of this narrative, but also she doesn't want, because obviously she sees this movement as entirely wrong, and kind of probably genuinely she views it as dangerous for the world. So she I think it says a lot about her view about men, that she wants to downplay the existence of women in that movement, because she doesn't want women to be seen as at fault really at all.
Well, as I said, it's very disappointing, clearly, that she would remove any agency and not even mention Elizabeth. And the fact that she came to Messages for Men, and I clearly was there and spoke, and it's clearly my event.
Clearly.
Like, it's just woman to woman. We could have had a conversation. You know, we also had a very fiery interaction at the end. I tried to do a Q&A, but most years it's not always been because we ran out of time or whatever.
Yeah.
But we did have a Q&A, I believe it was that year at the end, where this guy called William, who has written an article about incels recently, his girlfriend was there, and she is a feminist.
Yes.
And she was not happy. And she spoke up, and we had a lovely interaction. It was great. It was quite fiery. And, you know, I guess what I want to say is that if someone like Laura came to us and said, I want to attend, I probably would not want her to have a speech because the event's not for her, okay?
Yeah.
But I would gladly have said, you know what? We do a Q&A, you can come on the Q&A and you can have first digs at the questions and let's have a debate. And I would have protected her as well. So if there was some heckling going on, I probably would have said, hey, look, guys and gals, you know, we're all here for free speech, high-spirited debate, right? Let's keep it cool. And like 99% of people would do. There's always one person. But I've seen that, you see that everywhere. And so, you know, I just want people to know that. I don't know why I feel like I have to say this, but hey, you know, they're most welcome to come. And as I said, there have been people who have attended in the past and they have not said much. So.
Yeah. One question I want to ask you, because, you know, she really builds her bridge or her narrative or whatever on the quotes that she's culled from incel websites or discussion forums. And the key view that she has of incels is that cliche that they are men who think that women should have sex with them or owe them sex. I'm sure you're familiar with that sort of description. Now I know you've had a kind of fair bit of kind of interaction with the incel community. So do you want to speak to that?
Yes. So, I would say that the majority of the incel community do not feel like women owe them sex. They do not feel entitled to sex with said women. They are just angry that they are not considered for sex at all by pretty much most or any women.
Okay.
And then eventually this anger and resentment comes out online. And then what you'll find is that other guys who have maybe been through this process already then start trying to talk to them and maybe mentor them in some kind of way. And there has been a lot of, what would you call it? Just they self-regulate.
Okay.
You know, I don't think she would be like, oh my gosh, that doesn't happen at all. But I've seen it for myself. Okay, I've spoken to numerous incels who all talk about, you know, the anger that they may feel as a man who is just not considered to be attractive by anyone. Okay, they express their anger, and then sometimes, you know, they start to go, okay, you know what, this is probably not a good. It's probably not a good way to go to keep being stuck in this cycle of anger. Okay, and then they start to address their issues. And then other incels will then start to talk to them. Okay. And I actually think that those kinds of forums and community should exist. And I don't think that they should be censored. Because if you start to censor them, which they have been censored, but you censor them even more, right? And say, you're not allowed to express genuine anger and hate. Okay. And go away. Right, we don't want you here. We don't want you to express anything of the sort. Right, what I don't know what you think those guys are going to do, because if they, she's essentially saying that if they go and see a therapist, for example, that therapist, if they're designated as a potential terrorist, that therapist may have a responsibility to then report them to Prevent or a similar scheme.
Yeah.
All right. And I know incels this has happened to, by the way. So it is actually already happening.
Okay.
You know, and so where do they go? Where do they turn? It's essentially saying that any feelings of anger about the situation that they may be in, right? None of it is legitimate, okay, as in the sense that we all have moments where we feel angry about something or someone, and we will say, oh, I just want that person to suffer, right?
Sure.
But how many times, 99% of the time, people will, again, when they calm down and they say, well, you know what, genuinely, I don't actually want that person to suffer. I'm just particularly angry at the moment. And, you know, what I'm trying to say is that as a society, we already regulate this kind of behavior with everyone, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like feminists and women are allowed to express genuine anger and genuine hate in various ways.
Yeah.
Okay. Because feminists say that they are completely harmless, right? And they don't do anything to harm others at all, right?
Yeah.
But with men, any inch, like suspicion of a threat or raised voice or something,
it's dangerous. And it will be, and the most extreme of it will be plucked, you know, kind of, and held up as evidence of everyone. It strikes me that if I could be bothered, which I really can't, I could, you know, kind of go on to feminist websites and, you know, kind of extreme groups of, you know, or kind of fringe groups of women, and, you know, kind of find very kind of extreme words spoken about men and other women, you know. So I think, I don't think it's something that's unique, and absolutely, you know, kind of words can lead to actions. But, you know, kind of, I think if I'm correct, one of the things you're saying about the incel kind of forms is these are people, or these are men who are voicing their feelings. And by voicing their feelings, it's actually helping them to potentially get to a better place. Is that fair?
That's essentially what I'm saying. And I'm also that a lot of them are saying, we notice the amount of entitlement that women in society have. Okay, why can't we have that entitlement? And then they play and test that idea out.
Yeah.
Right. And for feminists to, like Laura, to have any kind of empathy or sympathy for them at all, they would have to admit that women have an unhealthy level of entitlement, right? Or at least all women do have that, but I mean, they're given it, okay? They're allowed, it's allowed to fester if that woman so chooses to have that.
I mean, well, certainly, you know, particularly, I feel like quoting Douglas Murray, who, you know, kind of always talks about there were things that everybody seemed to know until yesterday, and we seem to have forgotten. But I mean, you know, kind of throughout history, it's kind of generally understood that kind of women, for, you know, rightly or wrongly, are the kind of gatekeepers in a sexual relationship in terms of, you know, kind of, you know, kind of, well, you know, it's the whole chastity thing. It's kind of, you know, it's going back to that. So it's kind of, you know, like women have a lot of power in terms of choosing a mate, I guess, is, you know, kind of ultimately that. And that's, that my interpretation is that seems to be the key complaint of incels. It's a complaint that sort of basically everybody has at some stage in their life in terms of, I want a loving relationship and I have an aspiration as a human being to, you know, to achieve that. But kind of these men are struggling for whatever reason to achieve that, and quite often these men have disabilities.
Yeah. So that in my view is that there's two main groups in the incel community, as it were. There's a large section of young men who, more so than ever before, are not deemed as attractive than they would have been, say, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago or more. Okay. There is the way that the internet dating and all the fear mongering and feminism and just the level of entitlement that women have now, that I would say that there is a larger percentage of young men who are just maybe would have been able to date in the past, but these days it's harder for them. Okay. Eventually they tend to move on. They might have what's called like ugly duckling syndrome, where they're not that attractive, but by the time they're 28, women want. Okay, and that is more the case than ever, really. And because also a lot of women these days are delaying any serious dating, so they will date, they'll have fun in their early 20s, and that means generally with the same 20 to 30% of men. And then when they're older, they start to consider other guys. And that's something the manosphere talks about all the time. And I'm sure she thinks that's a horrible, Laura thinks that's a horrible misogynist thing. But sorry, the data is on our side, as it were. There's plenty of evolutionary psychologist types who studied this. This is a fact, Laura. Okay, just in case you're listening.
And if I could interject, in no kind of society, from an anthropological perspective, has it been observed that kind of shorts, fats, unemployed, balding men are kind of at the peak of attractiveness to the opposite sex?
Yeah. And then there's the guys who I would call so that first group are like temporary incels. Okay. Then there's the second group who are what I call in the community they call them true cells.
Okay.
They are a percentage of men who have always kind of existed and will continue to exist, who probably won't ever reproduce. Okay. Richard, who I interviewed, is one of them. He doesn't mind me saying that. I know some people in the past have been like, you can't classify, he can do what he wants, he can develop. And
sure.
He owns his position in the sense that he has the longest list of disabilities you'll ever see. Okay. Yeah. And he is legally retarded in the sense that if he has a relationship, he has to have a third party involved in the relationship because he's not really allowed to have one in that sense. Okay. He is an example of what you call a true cell in the sense that he, in the past and probably now, right? I don't think this has ever really changed. Because we know that through human history that 40% of men have not reproduced.
Yeah.
Okay. But 80%, between 70 and 80% of women have.
Yeah.
Okay. And so within that 40%, maybe some of them would be legitimate bachelors or MGTOWs, but there's definitely a percentage within that who are men who are just undesirable in the sense that they were either not able to have a relationship, were not considered worthy for marriage, or they just can't because they're disabled. Okay. And so when I did the interview with Richard, the idea was for him to say, look, I am a legitimate incel. All these other guys who are complaining online are they are the result of changing, changing cultural attitudes and the way that people are delayed dating, and also the sexual liberation that happened from the 60s has started to wean off a little bit, unbelievably so, even though our media is more sexualized more than ever. It's because we've had the data recently that says that young women are having more sex than ever and young men are having less sex than ever, right? At least, right? So, so he's saying, look, I am the guy who's probably never going to have a relationship or get married or whatever. You guys, you're probably going to be fine. And you're just going through this temporary response to what is going on in the world. And most of these guys move on from their situation, and Also within that, there is a untalked about issue, which there's a woman called Nama Cates who interviewed Richard as well, who's done a whole podcast series about incels.
Okay.
And she does mention this as well, is that a lot of them are sexual abuse victims from mothers or close women in their family. And this is an issue that is so strictly taboo and just there's not enough light shone on this at all. And Richard has really passionately spoken out about the fact that within the incel community, the prevalence of abuse from mothers or women is really high. And in his mind, that is how you create someone who, well, if there's someone who's predisposed to sociopathy or something, disorder in that way, and then they're abused, and they just so happen to not be that attractive, you're going to have 3 ingredients. Yeah. And it's really fascinating. It's really insulting that someone like Laura could then suggest that every single guy who's a bit pissed off that women don't like them, is like that. Because we know that a very small minority of the population are capable of doing such acts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's disgusting that she could suggest that most men are capable of or have sociopathic traits, because they don't. And ask any psychologist about that, and they will confirm that. That's very easily to prove and demonstrate.
Yeah. No, I mean, I get, kind of obviously, I would to some degree feel personally offended by the inference that she makes. It's pretty easy to brush off because I know I'm not that sort of person, and I don't take Laura Bates very seriously from a professional perspective. The thing that really disgusts me about people like Laura Bates is this incel narrative, because they're essentially kind of preying on some of the most marginalized people in society, and particularly that kind of group, the true selves, as you say. She has so much more status and power and privilege than someone like Richard, for example. And so that she is using very cherry-picked examples of words and actions. And one thing I want to do, I don't want to do it today, but I think it would be useful to kind of pull together a panel of people to discuss the allegation, which I have to say is kind of, it's on the surface, it's fairly convincing. Maybe convincing is not quite the right word, but it's certainly a kind of persuasive argument that she presents, where she presents a list of all of these individuals who have killed people. Very often it's more likely to be men, actually. People like Rogers, I've forgotten his first name now.
Elliot
Roger, yeah. So she does kind of manage to pull together, a very impressive list of people where she kind of associates them with, whether it's incels or kind of misogyny.
5 of them.
Is it 5 now? Well, I mean, her list certainly is longer.
It's a very long list, but anyway.
Yeah. But I think actually, I think it'd be a worthwhile exercise, even if it is only 5, that are actually can realistically be directly related to incels, because clearly there's kind of so many other factors kind of going on there, and we know that I think there was this kind of a stat pulled last year in terms of 23 out of the 24 last kind of serial shooters or whatever you call those mad people or madmen that's kind of take a gun in America and shoot lots of people. 23 out of 24 of them didn't have a father, for example.
Yeah.
They're all, Elliot Rogers apparently read A Voice for Men one day, so therefore that's his motivation I'm not even sure if that's true actually, but I think that's the inference anyway.
Well, he's. I actually read the majority of his manifesto. It was quite long, so
Okay.
it was a bit of an effort to read all of it. He
I know how you
criticized.
feel. I've just read Laura Bates's manifesto.
Yeah, it's similar in the sense that this guy has the level of narcissism in this guy is off the chain.
Okay.
It does seem like someone like Elliot Rodgers just really needed some attention from his parents for an extended period of time, right? And he may have still had some kind of disorder, high degree of narcissism, maybe social, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist, but what I'm saying is that it seemed like from what he wrote that there wasn't a lot of feedback going on from those people in his life who he would want to listen to or cared about, right? And to some degree, things like sports and other areas where boys get to be together alone without female influence, yeah, and they kind of get the ego knocked out of them a little bit, right? And I would say that that's a kind of, sorry, that's my clock. That I would say that is a rite of passage that men often have to go through, yeah. And I would say sports is a good way that they go through. Not always sports alone. It seems like he sort of avoids that kind of he avoided that kind of
interaction.
Interaction, and like especially because as we've discussed many times, the male spaces have been invaded so much. They're not really, they still exist, but they're just more sanitized, and anyway, so I'm just giving you an example of what I thought about his psychology, the insight into him, and he gave us a very detailed manifesto about himself. But he just seemed to be a child of parental neglect, like for sure. He talks about it all the time. And then he also goes on to talk about how he hates pickup artists, and how, the kind of manosphere is full of shit. He doesn't like them. So just because he mentions it, that's then used to demonize the whole thing. He wasn't impressed with them. So no. Anyway, sorry.
I know instinctually, or certainly she hasn't convinced me in her book, but it's kind of it's one of the allegations that I think kind of merits kind of really thorough kind of discussion to really flush it out, sort of thing, because it's essentially the kind of it's her key thesis that she builds everything else upon. Kind of the first few videos I'm going to do is focusing on the men's rights chapter, but we'll kind of hopefully talk again about that allegation.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to wrap it up a bit and go now, unfortunately. Yeah. But I'd like to talk to you again if after you've maybe developed a bit more on this, then we can.
Yeah, no, I think so, because kind of I got to sort of run this for a couple of months. I think kind of there's quite a lot of substance to get through, and I want to talk to quite a few people. So listen, thanks very much. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
I just want to finish with this. Yeah. I mean, it's obvious to everyone who knows about this stuff already, but I just want to say that feminists hate men, or they blame men in general. Okay.
Yeah.
And men's rights activists hate feminists, but they don't blame women in general.
Yes, and that's true. That's a very apt thing to say as well, because it fits very much with the stylizing of her chapters and the title of the book. It's it's kind of it's men who hate women, and it's you're absolutely right. Feminists do hate men. That
well, they will say they don't. They hate the patriarchy. They hate toxic masculinity, or they hate. But every time she makes her arguments in the book that pretty much all men are capable of rape and blah blah blah, right? So she goes against it all the time, and we all know that they're inconsistent in their arguments about this. They go back and forth. They backtrack all the time. but that is essentially what they're saying. They're saying that and they should be allowed to hate men as a group, okay? And the incels, you know, the ones that get angry about this, they say, well, why can't I hate women? And I think that's a legitimate question. Clearly, I would like to be saying I will talk to them and say, well, clearly having hatred of a whole group in society and then staying in that hatred for a long time is not a good idea, right? But if one group is allowed to be that way, then so should the other. I mean, you know, that's called equality. I'm not saying it's right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if you want equality, then, you know.
Yeah.
Really. I mean.
And it's certainly not healthy to kind of push opportunities to vent expressions of feelings, you know, completely away, because that's not necessarily going to solve any, you know, it can create more problems than it solves. Yeah. I'll finish by saying kind of the title of this kind of series I'm going to call this is kind of what I think of Laura Bates is that she's the woman who hates men for money. I think is the key to all of this, you know. So,
all right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this. I think you always do excellent work, and I look forward to seeing what you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.